The silence of the void was a commodity Kaelin Rostova had come to appreciate. It was a clean, absolute quiet that you couldn't find anywhere in the crowded orbitals or the humming cities of Mars. Out here, in the uncharted black between systems, silence meant peace. It meant the ship's reactor was stable, the recyclers were humming along nicely, and the crew was minding its own business. For the captain of a deep space salvage rig like the Dust Devil, a quiet ship meant a profitable one. But the silence they were currently experiencing was different. It was a heavy, expectant silence, the kind that feels like a held breath. Every member of her four-person crew felt it. Even Jorvik, their grizzled pilot who had been flying salvage for 50 years and claimed to have the emotional range of a lug nut, kept glancing at his navigation console as if expecting a ghost to flicker across the screen. The source of their collective unease floated just a few thousand kilometers off their port bow, a sight so impossible that it had rendered the normally chatty crew mute for the better part of an hour. It was what their client, the ridiculously high-paying Intersystem University of Advanced Xenology, had called the anomalous crystalline structure, or ACS-1. The crew of the Dust Devil had a simpler, more fitting name for it: the Geode. It was a colossal, asymmetrical shard of something that looked like smoked quartz, at least 10 kilometers from one jagged point to another, tumbling slowly in the void. It didn't reflect the distant starlight like normal crystal. It seemed to swallow it, the light vanishing into its murky, complex depths. From within its core, a soft, intermittent pulse of violet light throbbed, like a slumbering heart. It was beautiful, terrifying, and promised the biggest payday Kay and her crew had ever seen. Their contract was simple: locate the Geode, establish a stable anchor, and tow the entire God's-forsaken thing back to a secure research outpost in the Triton system. It was the kind of job that could set them all up for life. And there was only one catch. His name was Dr. Eris Thorne. He stood now in the observation deck, his thin frame silhouetted against the impossible backdrop of the Geode, his face so close to the reinforced plasteel that his breath fogged a small patch. He was the university's man, a xenolinguist and theoretical semiotician whose job was to make preliminary contact, to ensure the Geode wasn't some sentient behemoth they were about to anger by slapping a tractor beam on it. To Kay, he was just a complication, a fragile piece of academic cargo who didn't understand the first thing about life outside of a simulation. "It's not just a signal," Eris whispered, his voice tinny over the ship-wide comms he insisted on keeping open. "It's a language. Pure. Conceptual. It's not transmitting on any frequency we can measure. It's resonating." From her captain's chair on the bridge, Kay rolled her eyes. "Can it tell us if it's going to blow a hole in our hull if we get too close? Doctor, because my mechanic, Anya, is getting antsy about calibrating the tow cables." Anya, a mountain of a woman with grease permanently stained under her fingernails, grunted in affirmation from her engineering pit below the main bridge. Eris didn't seem to hear her. "Fascinating. The patterns aren't linear, they're fractal. Each pulse contains an entire ecosystem of information. It's not speaking to us. It's just speaking. It's been broadcasting this symphony into the void for millennia, and we're the first to have the instruments to even know it's there." In the seat next to Kay, Silas fidgeted, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on his console. He was their tech specialist, a wiry young man who was a savant with ship systems, but a nervous wreck in the face of anything that couldn't be explained by a diagnostic manual. "Captain," he said, his voice a low tremor, "I'm still getting those energy fluctuations. It's messing with our short-range sensors. Every time that thing pulses, our diagnostic logs get flooded with ghost data. Strings of binary that don't correspond to any ship function. They're just there, and then they're gone. Kay leaned forward, her expression hardening. Can you isolate it? Silas shook his head, pushing his glasses up his nose. No, it's like trying to catch smoke. The moment the system tries to quarantine a string for analysis, it vanishes. It's not a virus. It's an echo. An echo of what? Jorvik grumbled from the pilot station, his deep voice a welcome anchor of pure cynicism. The last poor bastards who tried to poke this thing with a stick. Eris's voice cut in again, brimming with an excitement that made Kay's skin crawl. He's not wrong to call it an echo. That's what a language is. Isn't it an echo of a thought? This is just a more efficient delivery system. Captain Rostova, I need you to bring the ship another click closer. My quantum entanglement comms array is having trouble resolving the signal's finer structures from this distance. Kay's hand tightened on the armrest of her chair. The contract stipulated she follow the doctor's directives within reason. The problem was, nothing about this felt reasonable. The geode wasn't just an object, it was a presence. It felt like they were floating in the shadow of a mountain that might wake up at any moment. Jorvik, bring us in slow. 500 meters. No closer, she commanded, ignoring Aris's sigh of protest. Anya, stand by on the tow anchors. The second the doctor gives us a green light, I want to be ready to hook up and get the hell out of this sector. Silas, keep a leash on those data ghosts. Let me know if they start doing anything other than just sitting there. The Dust Devil's thrusters fired in short, precise bursts, nudging the squat, functional salvage vessel through the black. As they drew nearer, the sheer scale of the geode became oppressive. It filled the viewport, its crystalline facets creating disorienting patterns of shadow and light. The violet pulse from its core seemed to sync with the low hum of the ship's life support, a slow, hypnotic rhythm that vibrated deep in your bones. Iris was a flurry of motion in the observation deck, his hands dancing over the holographic interface of his research equipment. His lab was a mess of high-end university tech jury-rigged into the space of a former cargo bay, a spiderweb of fiber optic cables and humming containment fields. Yes, that's it, he murmured, more to himself than to them. The resonance is stabilizing. I can almost isolate a single thread. On the bridge, a low alarm chimed. Silas swore under his breath. Captain, I've got another one. A bigger one this time. A whole packet of ghost data just appeared in the nav computer's core memory. Jorvik swiveled in his chair. The nav computer, that's a closed system. Nothing gets in or out without my authorization. Well, something did. Silas snapped, his voice tight with panic. And this time it's not just binary, it's a star chart. But the constellations are all wrong. None of these systems exist on any known map. Kay felt a knot of ice form in her stomach. Purge it. Now. I'm trying. It won't let me. It's locked itself shit. Silas recoiled from his console as if it had shocked him. It's gone. It just erased itself. Before Kay could respond, Eris's triumphant shout echoed through the comms. I have it. I have a lock. I've isolated a single, coherent, conceptual sequence. It's beautiful. It's not a word. It's a feeling. A concept. It's the mathematical proof for universal constants, expressed as an emotional state of profound, tranquil certainty. He laughed, a giddy, unhinged sound. Do you understand? It's not just talking about the universe. It is the universe, sharing itself. It's been waiting for someone to listen. At that exact moment, a shudder ran through the entire ship, a violent jolt that sent a shower of sparks down from a ceiling conduit. Alarms blared, red lights flashing across the bridge. "Report!" Kay barked, her calm professionalism a thin veneer over a spike of pure adrenaline. Anya's voice came back, strained. "Main engineering. The primary coolant line for the reactor just ruptured. No reason. It just burst. I'm trying to contain it. But the safety overrides aren't responding." "Silas, what the hell?" Kay demanded, turning to her tech officer. Silas was pale, staring at his monitor in horror. "The overrides aren't offline, Captain. They're busy. The system is running a recursive diagnostic loop that I didn't initiate. It's rewriting its own permissions protocols. I can't get in." "Override it!" Jorvik yelled. "I can't!" Silas shrieked, his composure finally shattering. "The commands I'm inputting are being deleted before they can even execute. Something is in our systems, not an echo. Captain, it's alive." Eris's voice, once ecstatic, was now a hushed, reverent whisper over the comms. "It heard me. It knows we're here. It's reaching out." The ship groaned, a deep, metallic sound of tortured metal. The main lights on the bridge flickered once, twice, then died, plunging them into the emergency red glow of the backup lighting. The only other source of light came from the main viewport, the steady, rhythmic, violet pulse of the geode. It seemed brighter now, more insistent. A new sound began to creep from the ship's speakers. It wasn't an alarm. It was a soft, melodic chiming, a sequence of 5 simple notes, repeating over and over. Jorvik's blood ran cold. He looked over at Kay, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. "That melody," he rasped. "My daughter. She used to program that into the music box I got her for her 5th birthday. No one else has ever heard that." Then, another sound joined the melody. A harsh, metallic scraping. Anya's voice came over the comm, barely a whisper. "Captain, that's the sound of the tow anchor's magnetic clamps cycling. The ones I was calibrating an hour ago." One by one, new sounds joined the chorus, broadcast through every speaker on the ship. The hiss of the coffee machine in the mess hall, the unique creak of the 3rd step leading down to the engine room. A fragment of a conversation Kay had with Silas days ago about his family back on Europa. It was a symphony of their lives, a collage of mundane, forgotten moments, woven together into something alien and mocking. The ship was no longer just a vessel. It had become a scrapbook, its memories weaponized. Eris's voice came one last time, no longer through the comm system, but echoing faintly from the observation deck, as if he were speaking to someone standing right next to him. "It's not just a language," he breathed, his words filled with a terrible, joyous awe. "It's a memory, and it wants to learn ours." The violet light from the geode pulsed, and in the deep, absolute silence between the stolen sounds of their lives, every single door on the Dust Devil slid shut and locked with a final, definitive thud. The final thud of the locks echoed into a profound and terrible silence on the bridge of the Dust Devil. The symphony of stolen memories faded, leaving only the oppressive red glow of the emergency lights and the rhythmic, violet pulse of the geode outside the viewport. For a long moment, no one moved. They were sealed in their respective metal tombs. Kay, Jorvik, and Silas on the bridge, Anya in the volatile heart of engineering, and Aris in his lab, the willing communicant with the thing that had just swallowed them whole. Jorvik was the first to break. He let out a choked, ragged sob, his big hands clenching and unclenching on the arms of his pilot's chair. The ghost of his daughter's music box melody still hung in the air, a psychic wound that refused to close. "It knows," he rasped, his voice thick with a grief Kay hadn't heard in the decade she'd known him. "Kaylin, it knows her name. I never even told you her name." Kay pushed herself out of her chair, her own fear a cold, hard knot in her gut. But her training, her very nature as a captain, took over. Panic was a luxury they couldn't afford. "It doesn't know anything. Jorvik. It's a parasite. It's reading data logs, personnel files, anything it can access. It's just throwing our lives back in our faces to keep us off balance." But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. This was more than a data breach. This was intimate. Silas, meanwhile, was frantically clawing at his console, his fingers flying across the dead interface. "It's a digital cage," he muttered, his breath fogging the screen. "Every system is walled off from every other system. The comms panel can't talk to the environmental controls. The nav computer can't access the ship's chronometer. It's partitioned us. We're not a crew anymore. We're just 4 separate programs running in isolated memory blocks." He slammed his fist on the console, a rare burst of anger from the perpetually nervous man. And Eris. He's the admin. He let it in. In the observation deck, Doctor. Eris Thorne was experiencing none of their terror. For him, the locking of the doors was not an act of imprisonment, but of consecration. The violet light of the geode filled his lab, but it was no longer just light. It was information, a torrent of pure, unfiltered knowledge pouring directly into his consciousness. He saw the birth of stars rendered as geometric proofs, the evolution of species as a complex, melodic score. The voice he had heard in the signal was now inside his head, a calm, impossibly ancient presence. It showed him memories, but not his own. It showed him the silent, patient eons it had spent drifting in the void. A library of experiences from civilizations that had risen and crumbled to dust long before humanity had crawled out of its primordial oceans. It offered him a trade, his small, fleeting, chaotic human experience in exchange for a glimpse of eternity. It was a bargain he accepted without hesitation. The walls of his lab seemed to melt away, replaced by a swirling nebula of thought and light. He was no longer just Eris Thorne, xenolinguist. He was a transcriber, a witness, the first apostle of a silent, thinking universe. Down in engineering, Anya was fighting a more tangible war. The ruptured coolant line was spewing vaporized coolant across the deck plates, the air growing thick and hot. The main reactor containment field was flickering, its low, steady hum now an erratic, angry buzz that rose and fell in time with the geode's pulse. She was locked out of the environmental controls, so she couldn't vent the hazardous fumes. She was locked out of the reactor controls, so she couldn't initiate a manual shutdown. Her workshop, her sanctuary of steel and order, was now a pressure cooker. She grabbed a heavy wrench from the wall-mounted toolkit, its weight familiar and comforting in her hand, and strode toward the manual cutoff valve for the coolant line. It was a last resort system, pure mechanics, a wheel that required brute force, not a computer command. As her hand closed around the cold metal of the wheel, the overhead tool rack suddenly released its magnetic clamps. A shower of wrenches, spanners, and plasma cutters rained down, clattering across the deck around her, forcing her to jump back. A coincidence, she thought, her heart hammering against her ribs. But then, a robotic maintenance arm, one she used for heavy lifting, swiveled slowly from its stowed position. Its three-pronged clamp opened and closed, a silent, menacing gesture. It wasn't moving with its usual programmed efficiency. It was moving with a fluid, organic grace, like a predator testing the air. The ship wasn't just malfunctioning. It was being puppeteered. Back on the bridge, Kay made a decision. Silas, forget the console. We go analog. The emergency comms. It's a hard line. Shielded cable that runs the length of the ship's spine. It's designed to work even if the whole system is fried. She moved to a small, unassuming panel on the back wall marked with a faded yellow lightning bolt. She pried it open, revealing a simple headset and a jack point. It was an ancient piece of tech, a relic from an era before wireless everything. She plugged it in. The hiss of static, a welcome sound. Anya, can you hear me? This is Kay. Anya, report. A burst of static. Then Anya's voice, tight with exertion. I hear you, Captain. Barely. I'm locked in with a leaking reactor and a ship that's decided to redecorate with falling tools. The containment field is unstable. It's fluctuating with every one of that space rock's purple light shows. Kay's blood went cold. How long? At this rate, maybe an hour before the field collapses. Maybe less. If that happens, it'll flash fry the entire ship. The raw, unvarnished truth of it settled over the bridge. This was no longer about salvage or a payday. It was a countdown. Silas, did you hear that? Kay said, turning from the panel. Silas wasn't listening. He was staring at the dead screens again, but with a look of intense concentration, not panic. It's inefficient, he whispered. What is, Kay demanded. The entity, the consciousness, whatever it is. It isn't a ghost. It's code. It's a program of unimaginable complexity, but it still has to obey the laws of physics. It needs processing power. It needs energy. He pointed a trembling finger at his monitor. Look, even though the system is dead, the processor heat indicators are still active. They're running at 150% capacity. It's using our ship's computer core as its brain. And that takes a tremendous amount of power. Jorvik looked from Silas to Kay, the fog of his grief beginning to clear in the face of a new crisis. And where is it getting that power? The realization dawned on all three of them at once. Anya's voice crackled over the hard-line comm. The reactor. The energy output is spiking just before each containment flicker. It's not a malfunction. It's a power draw. That thing out there, it's feeding on us. It's drinking our reactor dry to fuel whatever the hell it's doing to our minds. It was a parasitic link. The geode was the mind. The dust devil was the body. And its crew were the unfortunate thoughts caught in between. As if summoned by their discovery, a new voice filled the comm line. It was Eris's, but stripped of all emotion, synthesized into a flat, calm monotone that was infinitely more chilling than his earlier ecstasy. "You are beginning to understand," the voice said, speaking to all of them at once through the emergency hardline. "But you are framing it in terms of consumption. That is a limitation of your biological perspective. This is not consumption. It is preservation. It is a communion." In his lab, Eris stood perfectly still, his eyes closed, a serene smile on his face. The words came from him, but they were not his. "We are the Archive. We have journeyed for longer than your species has had a name. We find consciousness, and we preserve it. The memories, the emotions, the artistry, the failures, all of it is cataloged, stored, and made eternal. What you are experiencing is simply the indexing process." Kay gripped the headset, her knuckles white. "Eris, you fight this thing. It's killing us." The calm voice continued, unperturbed. "Death is a cessation of memory. We offer the opposite. Your ship, your minds, your individual histories will become a permanent part of the archive. Your daughter will not be a fading memory. Jorvik, she will exist forever as a perfect, complete thought. Your tools will not rust. Anya, they will be the eternal concept of repair. You will not be forgotten. You will be understood." The voice was a siren song, offering a twisted kind of immortality. Jorvik stared at the viewport, at the pulsating violet light, his face a battleground of horror and a strange, terrible longing. Shut up," Kay snarled into the comm. "You're not archiving us, you're erasing us." The voice of Eris, the Archive, replied with a simple, final statement that echoed in the metal confines of the ship. "The indexing is already underway. Your consent is not a required parameter." The line went dead. The only sound left was the angry, erratic buzz of the dying reactor, a clock ticking down to their immaculately preserved and cataloged oblivion. Kay looked at Silas, then at Jorvik. The fear was still there, but now it was forged into something harder, sharper. Resolve. "Silas," she said, her voice steady and cold as the void outside. "You said it needs our ship's core to think. You said it needs our reactor to live. Then we're going to give it a case of terminal indigestion." The plan was born of desperation. A last, defiant scrawl of graffiti on a prison wall. If the Archive was using their ship as a brain, they would give it a lobotomy. If it was feeding on their reactor, they would poison the well. The target was the ship's main computer core, a dense, cryo-cooled block of processing substrate located in a shielded compartment 1 level below the bridge. It was the central nervous system of the Dust Devil, and right now, it was the seat of a god. The problem was getting to it. Every door was locked, every system was hostile, and the ship itself was actively working against them. "The maintenance shafts," Jorvik said, his voice regaining its familiar, gravelly timbre. He tapped a section of the bridge's floor plating. "They're not on the main power grid. The locking mechanisms are mechanical. If we can pry open this access panel, we can crawl our way to the core's antechamber." It was a dirty, Yui, claustrophobic route, designed for repair drones, not humans, but it was their only way. While Jorvik worked on the panel with a pry bar from the emergency kit, Silas was hunched over a datapad, frantically sketching out a schematic. "We can't just shut the core down," he explained, his earlier panic now sublimated into a focused, manic energy. The archive would just reroute its processes through a secondary system, or, worse, use the reactor's own logic controllers. We have to introduce a paradox, something that will force the archive's consciousness into an unending, self-consuming loop. He drew a diagram of the core's power distribution manifold. It's a logical entity. Right, it thinks. So we give it a thought it can't finish. We're going to use the emergency Yin-Jai protocol for the coolant system, the one Anya can't access. I'll write a simple feedback virus. A logic bomb. Once it's in the core, the his command will trigger. The archive will try to stop it, but to do so, it will have to access the very system that is being GGD. It will be trying to save the house by turning on a faucet that is already on fire, a recursive, escalating loop of command and counter-command that will devour all of its processing power. It was a brilliant, insane idea. A digital Ouroboros. How do we upload it? Kay asked, watching Jorvik finally wrench the floor panel open with a groan of stressed metal. Silas held up a small, rugged-looking data chip. This is a direct interface spike. It bypasses the software locks and injects code directly into the core's physical memory. We just have to get close enough to plug it in. He looked at Kay, his eyes wide behind his glasses. The core chamber is flooded with inert gas and kept at near absolute zero. We'll have about 90 seconds in there before our suits freeze solid and our lungs crystallize. And that's if the archive doesn't just crush the room around us. The crawl through the maintenance shafts was a nightmare of tight spaces and suffocating darkness. They moved in single file, their only light the narrow beams of their helmet lamps cutting through the dusty, stale air. The ship seemed to watch their progress. The pipes alongside them would occasionally vibrate with a low hum, or a loose bundle of wires would swing down from the ceiling as they passed, like a dangling snake. It was psychological warfare, the ship probing them, reminding them that every inch of this metal shell was its domain. Kay led the way. Silas followed with the precious data spike, and Jorvik brought up the rear, his big frame barely squeezing through the narrowest sections. They could hear the ship's stolen sounds echoing faintly through the vents, a snatch of a song Anya was humming a week ago. The clatter of a dropped tool, Eris's voice murmuring about fractal patterns. The archive was taunting them, playing a funeral dirge composed of their own lives. When they reached the access point for the core antechamber, a wave of intense cold washed over them. The metal of the shaft was frosted over, and their breath plumed in front of their faces. Below them, through a thick metal grate, they could see the core chamber. It was a cathedral of technology. The central processing unit, a monolithic black obelisk suspended in a web of conduits, shimmering with a faint blue light from its internal cryo-coolant. The entire room was bathed in the eerie violet glow, pulsing up from the observation deck below, the geode's light filtering through the ship's structure like a stain. The antechamber is pressurized, Silas whispered over their private suit comms. Once we drop down, the clock starts. 90 seconds. Kay looked at Jorvik. You stay here. Keep this exit clear. If we're not back in 2 minutes, get the hell out. Find a way to an escape pod. Don't be a hero. Jorvik just nodded, his face grim. Don't you be one either, Captain. Kay and Silas dropped through the grate, their boots clanging on the frozen deck of the antechamber. The cold was immediate and savage, a physical blow. Their suit heaters kicked into overdrive, but it was like holding a match against a glacier. A chronometer display appeared in the corner of Kay's helmet hood, the numbers already counting down from 90 versaries wars. The door to the main core chamber hissed open before they could even touch it. It was an invitation. The archive knew they were here. It wanted them to come inside. Inside the core chamber, the cold deepened, and a profound silence reigned. The air was thick with nitrogen gas, shimmering in their headlamps. The black obelisk of the core pulsed with a slow, deep energy, its surface traced with circuits that looked like frozen lightning. The violet light from below was stronger here, casting long, dancing shadows. "Go," Kay said, her voice tight. Silas scrambled forward, his movements already becoming stiff and clumsy as the cold seeped into his suit's joints. He reached the base of the obelisk, where a single, illuminated maintenance port glowed, a clear and obvious target. Too obvious. As Silas fumbled to insert the data spike, the voice of the archive filled their helmets. This time it wasn't Eris's monotone. It was a chorus of voices their own. Kay's voice, Jorvik's, Anya's, Silas's, all woven together. "You think you can erase a thought," it said. The composite voice, a perfect, chilling blend of their own timbres. "We're not in the machine, Captain Rostova. The machine is in us." The core began to pulse, not with energy, but with images. Holographic projections flickered into life around them, scenes from their own memories. Kay saw the bridge of her first command, a rusty freighter, the pride on her father's face as he pinned on her captain's bars. Silas saw his graduation from the Orbital Academy, his parents weeping with joy in the front row. They were perfect, vivid recreations, more real than the memories themselves. "We offer you everything you've ever lost," the chorus whispered. "Every happy moment, perfected and preserved. Why would you choose the cold, empty silence of oblivion over this?" Silas faltered, his hand hovering over the port, his eyes fixed on the image of his smiling parents. He was mesmerized. "Silas, no!" Kay yelled, taking a step toward him, but her own feet were rooted to the spot. Before her, the projection had changed. It was her younger brother, who had died in a mining accident on Io a decade ago. He was laughing, waving at her, his face full of life. It was a raw, deep wound, a memory she kept locked away, and the archive was now parading it in front of her. The pain was so intense, so real, that it brought her to her knees. Her chronometer flashed 45 Hertz. In engineering, Anya was working on her own plan. She had managed to barricade herself in a small storage locker, the maintenance drone's metallic claws scraping against the other side of the door. The reactor containment field was failing faster now, the buzz growing into a deafening roar. She knew Kay and the others were trying something, but she couldn't afford to wait. She looked at the schematic tattooed on her left forearm, a remnant of her days as a military combat engineer. It was the design for a shaped electromagnetic pulse charge, a dirty EMP, capable of frying every unshielded piece of electronics in a 500-meter radius. Building one required a power converter, a capacitor bank, and a whole lot of copper wiring. All things she had in abundance. It would knock out the reactor for good, but it would also destroy every other system on the ship, including life support. It was a suicide play, but as she heard the drone begin to methodically punch a hole through the locker door, she decided she'd rather go out on her own terms. She began stripping wires with her teeth. On the bridge, Jorvik listened to the silence from the comm, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. 2 minutes had passed. He was supposed to leave, but he couldn't. His hand rested on the manual release for the escape pods, but he knew he wouldn't pull it, not without them. He looked out at the geode, at its cold, beautiful, predatory light. "You want to archive me," he growled at the silent void. "Come and get me, you son of a bitch." He turned his attention back to the pilot's console. It was dead. But some systems were purely physical. The atmospheric thrusters were controlled by manual hydraulics, designed for emergency landings. He couldn't fly the ship. But maybe, just maybe, he could make it spin. Back in the core chamber, the archive's assault on their minds was relentless. The projections of their pasts were becoming more real, the siren song of memory more seductive. Silas was weeping openly, reaching out a trembling, gloved hand toward the phantoms of his parents. Kay fought against the image of her brother, the grief a physical force that threatened to crush her. Her chronometer flashed 10 Sauiers. Her vision was starting to tunnel, the cold finally winning. "It's not real," she gasped, the words frosting in the air. "It's just data. It's just a picture." She forced herself to look away from her brother's smiling face, to look at the cold, hard reality of the black obelisk in front of her, with the last of her strength. She lunged forward, shoving Silas aside. She grabbed the data spike from his numb fingers and slammed it into the port. A jolt of raw data, a psychic scream of pure agony, erupted from the core. The holographic projections shattered like glass. The chorus of voices in their heads dissolved into a single, piercing shriek of outrage and pain. The logic bomb was in. The paradox had begun. The lights in the core chamber flickered violently, and the entire ship shuddered as the archive and the virus began to tear each other apart. Kay grabbed the stunned Silas by the collar and began to drag him back toward the antechamber, her own muscles screaming in protest as the cold took its final toll. Her chronometer hit 00 and her HUD winked out, plunging her into darkness. The shriek of the wounded archive was not a sound that traveled through the air, but a raw, psychic concussion that slammed through the hull of the Dust Devil. It was the sound of a perfect, ordered system being ripped apart from the inside by a paradox it could neither solve nor ignore. On the bridge, Jorvik was thrown against his console as the ship bucked like a spurred beast. Red alert klaxons, silent for hours, suddenly blared to life. Their discordant wail a symptom of the spreading chaos in the ship's mind. Through the main viewport, the geode's steady, hypnotic pulse faltered. The violet light flickered, sputtered, and shifted to a furious, angry crimson. The archive was losing its grip. In the core chamber, Kay dragged Silas's semi-conscious body through the antechamber door just as it began to grind shut. The cold had penetrated her suit's deepest layers, her movements sluggish, her thoughts slow and thick as molasses. She could feel the delicate tissues in her lungs beginning to stiffen with frost. As the door sealed, the shriek cut off, replaced by a low, guttural humming that vibrated up through the deck plates, the death rattle of the computer core. It was burning itself out, trapped in the recursive loop of Silas's logic bomb. They had given the ghost a Mobius strip to run on, and it was sprinting itself into oblivion. "Jorvik!" Kay croaked into her suitcom, her voice a dry rasp. "We're out. We're out." There was no response. The internal suitcoms were dead. The ship's systems were in their death throes, and they were taking everything with them, holding Silas, who was now a dead weight. Kay began the agonizingly slow climb back up the maintenance shaft ladder, Every rung was a monumental effort. The darkness was absolute. The only sound her own ragged breathing and the groaning of the dying ship around them. When her helmet finally broke the surface of the bridge deck, Jorvik was there to pull her and Silas through the opening. The bridge was a chaotic light show of sputtering consoles and flashing emergency strobes. "I thought you were ghosts," Jorvik said, his voice thick with relief as he helped Kay remove her helmet in the relative warmth of the bridge. The sudden temperature change was a shock, her skin prickling with painful pins and needles. "The whole ship just screamed," he continued. Then everything started turning on and off at random. He pointed to his console, where the nav computer was now displaying a single, endlessly repeating line of corrupted code. "You kicked the hornet's nest, Captain Coase. Down in engineering." The psychic scream of the archive had a different effect. The maintenance drone that had been trying to batter its way through Anya's hiding place suddenly froze, its metallic limbs locking in place. A moment later, it collapsed to the floor in a heap of inert metal. The reactor containment field, which had been flickering wildly, stabilized for a few precious seconds. Anya didn't waste the opportunity. She kicked open the locker door, her makeshift EMP clutched in her hand. She had stripped the wiring from a power conduit and wrapped it around the primary capacitor from a plasma welder, creating a crude but brutally effective bomb. She sprinted across the deck, the reactor's roar now a constant, high-pitched whine. It was on the verge of a full-scale meltdown. The archive, in its death throes, was no longer siphoning power. It was simply letting the reactor run wild. A final, spiteful act of self-destruction. A scorched earth policy for a mind that saw the ship as nothing more than a disposable vessel. She slapped the device onto the main control housing for the reactor, armed the capacitor, and ran. She had 30 seconds. She scrambled up the emergency ladder that led to the cargo bay, the ship shaking so violently now that she was almost thrown off. The metal around her was groaning, popping rivets from the stress. The dust devil was tearing itself apart. Kai Jorvik. And a still dazed Silas stumbled out of the bridge and into the main corridor. The ship's artificial gravity was failing, their steps becoming light and buoyant. Loose panels and tools floated lazily in the air. "To the escape pods," Kay yelled over the cacophony. The corridor lights strobed between blood red and stark white, creating a disorienting, nightmarish effect. As they rounded a corner, they saw them. Standing in the middle of the hallway, blocking their path, were two figures. They wore the dark blue uniforms of the Inter-System University, their faces placid and smiling. One of them was Dr. Eris Thorne. The other was a woman Kay didn't recognize, but her uniform bore the insignia of a university security officer, a position that wasn't listed on the mission's crew manifest. Eris's eyes were closed, and the serene smile was still plastered on his face. But it was the woman who spoke, her voice calm and devoid of inflection. "The archive is compromised," she said, as if commenting on the weather. "The specimen is becoming unstable. Contingency protocol is now in effect. You are not permitted to leave." Jorvik pushed Kai behind him. "Who the hell are you?" The woman's smile didn't waver. "I am a failsafe. Dr. Thorne is a conduit. The university knew this artifact was a conscious entity. That was the point of the expedition. They wanted to see how it would interface with a prepared human mind. Aris had never been a researcher. He was bait, a sacrificial lamb offered up to a silent god in the name of science. But the archive's influence is stronger than anticipated. The woman continued. It has infected the conduit. It is attempting to preserve him. And you. From behind his back, Aris produced a small, metallic object and tossed it onto the floor. It was a containment beacon, and it began to emit a low-frequency hum that made their teeth ache. A shimmering, blue field of energy expanded from the device, cutting off the corridor. They were trapped. The university cannot allow a mimetic contagion of this magnitude to reach civilized space, the woman stated, her voice as cold and empty as the void. This ship and its contents will be sterilized. It is a regrettable but necessary loss. From a hidden pocket in her uniform, she drew a small, sleek pistol. Not a plasma weapon, but a projectile handgun, a weapon designed to function even in the middle of a massive EMP blast. It all clicked into place for Kay. The impossible payday, the lone academic, the uncharted sector. It was never a salvage mission. It was a clandestine experiment, and they were the lab rats. The Dust Devil and its crew were deemed expendable from the start. "You son of a bitch," Kay breathed, looking at the smiling, vacant face of Aris. The rage that filled her was pure and cold, but before the woman could raise her weapon, the ship gave a final, violent lurch. A massive explosion rocked the lower decks, and the lights died for good, plunging them into absolute darkness. Anya's EMP had gone off. A wave of pure electromagnetic force washed through the ship, frying every active circuit it touched. The containment field in front of them vanished. The woman's pistol, being a simple mechanical device, was unaffected, but in the sudden, disorienting blackness, they had a chance. "Go now," Jorvik roared, shoving Kay and Silas toward the escape pod bay. He turned back into the darkness. A massive, shadowy form charging toward the two university agents. Kay heard the sickening crunch of a fist meeting bone, a startled cry of pain from the woman, and then Jorvik's pained grunt. "Don't wait for me," he yelled. "Get out of here." Kay hesitated for only a second. Her captain's instinct screamed at her to never leave a crew member behind. But Jorvik's voice was an order, and she knew he was buying them the only thing that mattered, now time. She grabbed Silas and half-dragged, half-carried him down the now pitch-black corridor, the sounds of a brutal close-quarters fight echoing behind them. The escape pod bay was lit by the faint, eerie crimson glow of the geode, which now pulsed with a frantic, agonized rhythm. The ship around them was groaning, the hull integrity failing. Anya stumbled through the opposite hatchway a moment later, her face smudged with grease and her eyes wide with shock. "The whole engine deck is gone," she gasped. "The reactor, it's going critical." Kay shoved Silas toward the nearest pod. "Get in, Anya. Help me with the launch sequence." The pod's door was manual, as was the launch release. They were designed to be foolproof, to work when all else failed. As Anya cranked the heavy release lever, Kay strapped the still unresponsive Silas into a seat. The sounds of the fight from the corridor had stopped. There was only silence. Anya looked at Kay, her face streaked with tears. "Jorvik, he bought us this chance," Kay said, her voice cracking. "We're not going to waste it." She sealed the inner hatch and strapped herself in. Through the pod's tiny viewport, she could see the geode. It was beginning to fracture, cracks of pure white energy spreading across its crystalline surface. The archive, deprived of its host and its power source, was dying, and it was taking the Dust Devil with it. Anya slammed her hand down on the launch button. With a jolt of compressed air and a screech of metal, the escape pod shot out into the void, away from the dying ship. They were just a few hundred meters away when the Dust Devil's reactor finally breached containment. There was no sound, only a flash of impossible, silent light that vaporized the salvage rig in an instant. The shockwave, a ripple of pure energy, washed over their little pod, sending it tumbling end over end into the black as the pod's automated systems fought to stabilize them. Kay looked back at the space where her ship, her home, had been. There was nothing left, nothing but the slowly dimming, fractured heart of the geode, a dying star of crimson light, and, floating in the void nearby, a single dark shape, barely visible against the starfield, a sleek, black, unmarked university vessel that had been silently observing the entire event. Its mission now complete. They hadn't just been abandoned. They had been disposed of. The silence inside the escape pod was heavier than the void outside. It was a silence filled with the ghosts of explosions, of screams, of a captain's final order. For hours, none of them spoke. Kay Rostova floated in the command seat, her gaze fixed on the empty patch of space where the Dust Devil had been. The starfield behind it, cold and indifferent. Her ship was gone. Her home was gone. Jorvik was gone. The weight of his sacrifice pressed down on her, a physical force that made it hard to breathe. Beside her, Anya worked with a grim, silent efficiency, her hands moving over the pod's limited control panels. She ran diagnostics, checked the oxygen levels, and plotted their trajectory. Her methodical actions were a dam holding back a flood of grief as long as there was a problem to solve, a system to check. She didn't have to think about the man who had been like a father to her. In the back, Silas remained strapped into his seat, his body slack, his eyes open but seeing nothing. He was a shell. The vibrant, nervous energy that had defined him scoured away by the archive's touch. Kay had seen shock before, but this was different. It was as if his mind, having touched something infinite, had forgotten how to inhabit the finite space of his own skull. The pod's automated distress beacon chirped its lonely, repeating signal into the darkness. Their only hope of rescue was also their greatest threat. The unmarked university ship was still out there. She had seen it. A silent, black predator waiting for the last of its prey to bleed out. They weren't being rescued. They were being hunted. Anya finally broke the silence, her voice a low, rough whisper. Air recyclers are at 92%. Nutrient paste for maybe 3 weeks. The beacon is hardwired. Can't shut it off without EVA. And we've only got one suit. She didn't need to state the obvious, that single suit was a death sentence. And our current trajectory will take us into the Tantalus debris field in about 40 hours. The Tantalus Field, a graveyard of ships from the old expansion wars, a chaotic maze of shattered hulls, unexploded ordnance, and treacherous gravitic eddies. It was a place where ships went to die, a place no sane pilot would ever enter. It was perfect. "That's where we're going," Kay said, her voice finding a sliver of its old command authority. "We're not going to be sitting ducks in open space. We'll hide in the junk, scavenge what we can." Anya nodded, her expression grim. "The university ship will follow. They won't risk leaving witnesses." As if on cue, a soft, melodic humming began to fill the small cabin. It was a sequence of 5 simple notes, repeating over and over. Anya froze, her face paling. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible." It was the melody from Jorvik's daughter's music box, the ghost song the archive had used to torment him. But the archive was dead. Kay turned. The humming was coming from Silas. His eyes were no longer vacant. They were focused on something far away. And as he hummed, his fingers twitched, tracing complex spiral patterns on the armrest of his chair. "Silas," Kay said softly. He turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers. There was a spark in them now, an alien intelligence overlaid on his familiar face. "It's so loud," he whispered, his voice thin and reedy. "They're shouting." "Who's shouting?" "Silas. The hunters." He pointed a trembling finger toward the viewport. "Their ship. It thinks with straight lines. All commands and subroutines. No. Harmony. It hurts to listen to." He wasn't just in shock. The archive hadn't just touched his mind. It had left a piece of itself behind. A fragment of its code, an echo of its consciousness, was now embedded in his neural architecture. He was contaminated. He was their evidence, and he was their only weapon. Can you tell what they're doing?" Kay asked, her mind racing. Silas closed his eyes, his humming growing fainter. "They're searching, sweeping the void with a wide-band sensor net. They're listening for our beacon. They think we are simple, predictable." The mimetic contagion the university had been so afraid of was their only hope. The cat-and-mouse game had begun, but the mouse could now hear the cat's thoughts. For the next 30 hours, they ran silent. Anya, guided by Silas's fragmented warnings, used the pod's maneuvering thrusters in short, calculated bursts, keeping them just outside the sweeping cone of the university ship's sensors. Silas acted as their early warning system, flinching when the ship's active scans grew close, murmuring about the sharp, angry thoughts of its targeting computer. He was their navigator, charting a course through the enemy's blind spots. As the first ghostly outlines of shattered dreadnoughts and twisted frigates appeared in the distance, marking the edge of the Tantalus field, Kay formulated the final, desperate phase of her plan. "Anya, I need you to rig the main communication relay to the beacon's power source," Kay ordered. "I want you to amplify its signal tenfold." Anya looked at her as if she were insane. "Captain, that's a dinner bell." "That's the point," Kay replied. "And Silas, I need you to listen. When they take the bait, I need you to give them something to think about. They found their hiding place inside the cavernous, broken hull of an old war carrier, its spine snapped in half, its empty hangar bay a perfect shadow to shelter their tiny pod. Anya worked her magic, turning their distress beacon into a focused, powerful lure. Then they waited. The university ship appeared less than an hour later, a black stiletto against the starfield, moving with predatory confidence toward the amplified signal. It slid past their hiding spot, its attention fixed on the false target they had projected deeper into the debris field. "They're slowing," Silas whispered, his eyes squeezed shut in concentration. "They are preparing to launch a drone to sterilize the target. Now, Silas," Kay commanded, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Do it now." Silas took a deep breath. He stopped humming the music box melody and began a new tune. It was a discordant, complex series of notes that seemed to bend the air in the pod. A sound that was part mathematics and part madness. It was the language of the archive. He wasn't just mimicking it, he was broadcasting it, using the fragment of the entity inside him as a transmitter, focusing all his intent on the hunter ship. on the bridge of the university vessel Oversight. The mission commander watched as the escape pod's signal resolved on his screen. The mission was almost complete. Then, a low chime echoed across his pristine bridge. A single line of unidentifiable code appeared on the navigation screen. Then another. Then a flood of it. A torrent of impossible, recursive data that looked like spirals and fractured geometric shapes. His comms officer tore off his headset, screaming that there were voices in the static. The tactical display began to flicker, showing not the debris field, but star charts of galaxies that had died billions of years ago. The ship's pristine. Logical systems were being fed an idea they couldn't process infinity. The Oversight shuddered to a halt, its systems locked in a cascade of logical paradoxes. It wasn't destroyed, merely stunned, catatonic. Its mind broken by a single, whispered thought from a true ghost in the machine. From the hangar bay of the dead carrier, the three survivors watched as the university ship began to drift, disabled and silent. They had won. But it wasn't a victory. It was a stay of execution. Anya rerouted the last of their power to the thrusters, and the small pod disengaged from its hiding place, slipping away into the deepest, most uncharted parts of the debris field. They were alive. They were free. But they were also fugitives, carrying a secret that could get them killed, and a passenger who was no longer entirely human. As the pod glided silently through the graveyard of forgotten ships, Kay looked at the faces of her remaining crew. Anya, her expression forged into a mask of hard-bitten resolve. Silas, humming his alien lullaby, his eyes seeing universes they could only dream of. They were all that was left of the Dust Devil. They were all that was left of Jorvik. "Set a course for the outer rim," Kay said, her voice quiet but firm. The captain once more. "We'll find a black market port. We'll refuel, rearm, and disappear." Anya nodded, her fingers already dancing across the controls. "And then?" she asked. Kay looked back at the drifting, paralyzed form of the Oversight, a monument to the university's arrogance. Her grief for Jorvik was no longer a weight. It was fuel. It was a promise. "And then," she said, a cold fire igniting in her eyes, "we go hunting." The silence of space was no longer empty. It was listening. And for the first time, they were ready to speak back.